Good evening and welcome to my lair. It's actually just my house, but we'll call it a lair tonight because it sounds gother. I'm in quarantine, same as I'm sure most of you are, which means that unfortunately I'm not getting to do my Just the Tip videos for you guys. I had so many planned and I'm gutted because I was really enjoying making them, but hey ho. So instead what I'm going to do is give you some examples of how I design your tattoos. All I've done for this video is a kind of start to finish, how I lay out my references, how I sketch it out, how I put the details in, how I put the colour in, and then finishing touches. This is Bobby, my pug. I use Procreate, so I draw everything digitally these days. I've tried to kind of put in examples of what I'm doing while I'm doing it. Hopefully it will give you a good idea of how I put together a design, where I start and where I finish with it. Hope you enjoy it. The first thing I always do when I'm starting a design is make sure I've got all of the right reference images that I need. That can usually take me around an hour to gather them all, so that's kind of the first hurdle to get over. Usually I find them on Pinterest and Google. Any kind of stock images websites are pretty good too. Over the years I've also collected tons of images that I just save in my camera roll and on my Pinterest. Back in the day I used to use Photoshop and I would make a kind of collage like I'm doing here. I would print it off and then I would make a kind of rough sketch from that with tracing paper. But with the miracle of Procreate, we don't have to do that anymore. It's genius. So all I'm doing here is just making a very, very rough kind of map for myself that I will then draw over the top of, essentially. So I like to just map things out first using my references, so I've got a kind of guideline to go from. Just to point out, I don't do this when I'm drawing for fun. This is more just because it saves me time when I'm drawing tattoo designs. The next thing I do is very roughly map out any kind of creative extra bits that I feel like I want to add in. Quite often when I'm doing this, I'll put stuff in, take it out, decide I don't like it. After I've done that, this is the laborious part where I kind of make the actual design from the rough sketch. It takes time, there's a lot of lines, as I'm sure you're aware if you've been tattooed by me, but this is what turns into the stencil when I tattoo you. When I'm colouring in, I work in layers, so I put flat solid layers of the midtones in first, and then once I've done that I start a new layer and I'll put the looser darker tones in on that layer. I don't often look at my reference image while I'm colouring in. I'll just have a sneaky look now and again. I like it to be more organic, more my thought process than copying something exactly. When I'm doing shading in a face or something, I tend to use a soft brush. I am a big fan of the charcoal brushes. I think they're quite nice. You can create textures with them. They blend really well. I like the airbrush too for kind of smaller, tighter details, but I'm a big fan of the charcoal brushes for faces and textures and things. Like I said before, I don't really work from my reference image when I'm colouring stuff in. I think that's partly because I'm so influenced by fantasy art and I just really like things to feel a bit more weird. Enjoy realism, but that's not what I work in. So for me, it's best to work from my brain for this kind of thing. Working in layers means that when I fuck up, I don't have to delete everything. I can just either delete a layer or I can go back a couple of steps, and that saves me from going insane a lot of the time, I'll be honest with you, the amount of lines and stuff I put in. When I come back to doing the smaller details again, I tend to switch back to a harder brush, so something like a calligraphy brush. I quite like the script one because it's got a tapered end, means that it's nice, it's pressure sensitive, so you can get really detailed, really tight in there. And I work in a very similar manner to how I tattoo, so I tend to put in the mid-tones and the darker tones first, and then the lighter and brighter colours towards the end of the tattoo. I do sometimes go back in and put darker tones in when I tattoo and when I draw on Procreate as well. When I get towards the end of designing something like this, I can get a little bit fidgety, I'm not going to lie. I've often been sat on my arse for 3, 4, sometimes even 5 hours before I get to the point of putting in the really fun bits or the little details. So sometimes I'll step away from it, go walk the dogs and come back to it later. I find otherwise I tend to rush it. It's good to step back. And then when I'm adding the final white highlights, I use a combination of soft and hard brushes, and I'll jump between the two as I'm putting the finishing touches on the piece. So sometimes I'll go in and put little highlights in the eyes with a hard brush. I might do a kind of sweep of light on the face with a softer brush or a stippling brush. And ultimately, here we have my finished design, I suppose. So yeah, she's complete. The only other thing that I tend to do when I'm making a print is to add a border and a background just to finish it off. So if you have any questions, just ask away. I'm more than happy to answer. And thank you so much for watching. Keep an eye out for more. Stay safe, stay home, all of that jazz. Did art GCSE, went on to do art and design. Spike.